Now, today I want to talk with you, and I'll tell you up front about a way of giving that is not always familiar to us and maybe a bit uncomfortable to engage. We're all familiar with giving according to our means, according to our ability, giving what we've got. We call that stewardship. And indeed, I doubt that there isn't one among us who couldn't be better at it and therefore benefit God's work by doing so. But I want to shift gears today from that style of giving what we've got, to another that's called faith promise giving. And it's giving what we haven't got. Did you know you can give what you haven't got? You can, if God's got it to provide you to give. Faith that God provides, promise to give it. Fisherman was on the dock and he caught a rather large fish, and a big keeper for sure, but he threw it back into the lake. An onlooker noticed, couldn't help but wonder. The fisherman then caught another fish, and it was quite small, throwaway. But he didn't. He kept it and put it in his bucket. As the onlooker watched, he noticed that this fisherman, every time he caught a big one, he threw it back, and the little ones he kept. Finally, the onlooker said, "Hey, what's up? Why do you do that? Why do you throw the big ones back and keep the little ones?" And the fisherman replied, "I toss the big ones back because I only have a 6-inch frying pan." Now, hear me. We are all victims of our self imposed limits in sizing up what's too big for our frying pan, especially when it comes to giving. Because if all we think we can give is what we've got a 6-inch frying pan perspective. It's not until we understand that God wants to give through us what we haven't got, or what God can free up in ways that make it available that we would never otherwise have available. Then indeed, we're moving beyond our 6-inch frying pan. You know, Mother Teresa was a remarkable woman. Most of us think of her, she's sainted, because of her great compassion. But I've come to appreciate her for her faith. She was a woman of remarkable faith. You know, it took an awful lot of money to provide for the expanding global ministries of the missionaries of charity that she started. At one time, her order had 3,000 sisters, 400 brothers, serving in 71 countries. There were, in India alone, 146 centers or houses, as they called them, of their society. And around the world, there were 350 of them. It took a whole lot more than loving hearts to feed 126,000 families, educate 14,000 children in 97 schools, care for 186,000 victims of leprosy, and 22,000 dying homeless people on the streets. No, it took money, big money. Mother Teresa broke all the rules for fundraising. She never kept a contact list of donors. She never sent out on any mailing list to solicit gifts. She conducted no telethons, no video promotionals with heartfelt and heartrending appeals for contributions, no superstar endorsements. You know, her board of directors was not stocked with any really wealthy types. Actually, it had only one member. And Jesus doesn't carry much weight in the financial community. She turned down huge endowments, never accepted a one, nor would she accept government funding. How in the world? I mean, if giving comes solely from what we've got, she was stuck. What she had could never float this boat. It all began, and you could see it coming when she first started and asked the superiors of her order, where she was a teacher in a private Catholic school in India teaching rather wealthy children. And having been exposed to Calcutta and the slums and the needs, she went to them to ask permission to launch a ministry. Here's what she told them. She said, I have 3 pennies and a dream from God to build an orphanage. Her sisters, the superiors, replied, Dear sister, 3 pennies? You can't build an orphanage with 3 pennies. With 3 pennies, you can't build anything. But Mother Teresa wasn't about to let what they saw in what little she had define what she saw in Jesus' resourcefulness to provide. She replied, I know, but with Jesus and 3 pennies, I can build anything. And she did. She daringly believed that Jesus had called her into this mission. And she knew that because it was his work and not hers, it was up to him and not her to provide for it. And his resources were inexhaustible. I'll tell you a story. She went to London once. She found a house to establish a news center, and it was on sale for £9,000. She offered the owner $6,000, and out of kindness, he accepted. Where was she going to come up with £6,000? People asked. But you see, that wasn't her business, as she saw it. It wasn't her business to come up with that money. That was Jesus' business. Her business was to pursue the purposes of God in her life. It was his business to provide for them. It was that. It was either living that way, or she would never take on anything that was bigger than she could accomplish on her own. And then she'd be left living within the self-imposed limits of her 6-inch frying pan. When she was asked where the £6,000 would come from, she simply replied rather joyfully and casually, oh, the Lord will provide. Oh, the Lord will provide. She went about Great Britain on speaking engagements to the different places where they had ministries, and wherever she spoke, it seemed like God would touch people. She never solicited. He'd touch people, and they'd come up to her or one of the other sisters to give something. And it always wound up in the big purse that was an old knitting bag type of affair that hung on her shoulder, and they'd throw the checks and the gifts in there. After the tour, she returned to London. She turned to one of the sisters and said, hey, I think there's some money in there. You might want to count it. Somebody in the group tossed in a £5 note, kind of on top of it all, and they counted it. Now, you know what I'm going to tell you. You sure do. Would you believe that when they counted it, it totaled £6,000? Oh, indeed. A coincidence, some would say. A very unusual coincidence at that. Oh, of course. If all you've got is a 6-inch frying pan to work with, that's all you can see. Indeed, Today is Faith Promise Sunday. Today, today you are invited to take a step of faith. We're not asking you to give more of what you got. We can all do that and should. What we are invited by God to do is to tap what He's got, His resources to provide, and to step out in giving, not just according to our ability, but according to God's ability, as each of us by our faith can appropriate. The scripture read, the Macedonian church in 2 Corinthians 8. Paul sees in their giving God at work. He says, we know the grace of God at work in the Macedonians in their giving. And then he explains why he thought God was at work there. Certainly in the measure of their liberality, they were going through persecution, they were poor, and yet it all overflowed with their joy into liberality. That was a grace act of God. But then he goes on to say, and beside that, it's not just how they gave, but what they gave. They gave not only as they were able, but they gave beyond what they were able. And if you follow the conversation to the next chapter, you discover Paul saying something like this: God is able to provide you every blessing in abundance, so that you may always have enough of everything, and that you may provide for every good work. In other words, God's not only able to provide what I need to live, He's able to provide what I need to give. And he concludes, listen to this: you will be enriched in every way for great generosity. The only way God can grow that great generosity is for Him to supply great possibilities for giving. So it's goodbye, 5-inch frying pan. Goodbye to giving solely just according to my capability. When you ask yourself this question, how much can I give? How do you answer it? If you answer it by looking at what you've got to determine what you can give, then you have not answered it as you could. Instead, what God's got and can give through you is how God measures your giving capacity. So I want to share a few stories, just a couple, and they're shared in order to help bring home how God has worked in the course of providing, not for people to get more for themselves, but to give more in His service through faith promise. In 1974, when I was the pastor at the McLeod Methodist Church, our first appointment in Oklahoma, having transferred from the New York Conference, I experienced faith promise giving for the very first time. The amount my wife and I decided upon was an amount large enough to stretch us. We knew it wasn't something we could come up with just incidentally. This was going to take some help beyond us. We knew that. Shortly after it, a man came to my office at the church. The offices were in a little old house next door. This was no big shakes here. Okay? My office was in, I guess, what was once a bedroom. And he came by to see me. He came by to thank me for my services at his mother-in-law's funeral. She had been a member of the church, though inactive. He and his wife lived in Oklahoma City. In the course of our brief conversation, he concluded and he turned to me and once again, thank you, and he gave me an envelope. An envelope. In token of appreciation. I couldn't wait for him to leave. You see, something something told me this is from God. This is faith promise, installment number one. As soon as he left, I got into that envelope, and what I saw literally blew my mind. In fact, I waited until he got home and called him because I wasn't sure that perhaps he'd meant that as a memorial gift in her behalf for the church. No, he said, that's for you. 1974. The amount was 4 to 5 times greater than any honorarium I'd ever received, whether from the funeral home or the family directly. I counted it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 $20 bills. $100. That was big enough to me to have God's fingerprint on it. But that wasn't the real seal of the deal. What really spoke to me that this was from God was the fact that the funeral for his mother-in-law I had conducted more than a year earlier. And out of the clear blue, he walks in with the largest honorarium I've ever received. You remember the Toyota commercial where the guy goes, woo! I was jumping for joy. God's hands were all over this. We had Faith Promise Sunday after that at our church. I remember little Kathy, 6th grade girl. She wanted to make a faith promise. Her parents came to me before the event. We formally made them, and they were scared. No, Kathy's 6th grade. She has no income, no job, and she wants to make a faith promise for $60. 1974. Doug, we're afraid that she's going to have a bad experience and it's going to damage her faith. We talked. They worked it through. Kathy made her faith promise. Shortly after, one of our teachers, public school teachers in the church, who had been on maternity leave, went back to school, and she was looking for someone who could take care of her baby every now and then after school for a couple hours. I don't know why she picked Kathy, 6th grader, but she did. And Kathy didn't hesitate to say yes. 50, 75 cents an hour, that was the going rate back then. It took a while to get some money. She finally had 10 to 15 bucks collected, and that was a haul for a 6th grade girl who had no income to think about spending on herself. In fact, her own mother said to her one day, Kathy, let's go to Shawnee. It's time for you to get something nice with your money. And Kathy said to Sylvia, Mom, that's not my money. God provided that money for my faith promise. And every now and then, as I would receive the offering in worship, I'd see a little white envelope with Kathy Florence's name on it. And I knew what was in it. She was remitting some of her faith promise. I'll never forget the Monday morning. Her mother came to my office, Sylvia. She couldn't contain herself. She sat down and she said, Doug, with tears coming down her cheeks, Doug, yesterday Kathy put the final installment of her faith promise in the offering. And then she added, for the first time in her life, she's seen God work in her. Wow. Went to First Methodist in Tulsa. It was 1982. Some of you weren't around then enough, or maybe around at an age where you would remember. But the early 1980s were a disaster for the Oklahoma and national economy. It was devastating. I watched people in our church lose not only all their investments because of the oil bust. I watched people lose their jobs, their businesses, big businesses. I watched one guy lose his house, $1 million home in 1980s early. It was devastating. And what was equally bad about it was the inflation rate was off the charts. And here we as a church at First Methodist Tulsa were in the midst of building a $5 million family life center. And do you know what the interest rate on the construction loan at the bank was? You won't believe it. 22%. What we've been through recently doesn't begin to compare. And church income was dropping off too. And here we were on the eve of having our first missions conference with Faith Promise Giving. And the finance committee met and said to our senior pastor, Dr. Thomas, Bill, this is not the time to ask our people to give more. This is not the time. Please postpone this. And Bill Thomas said to him, oh, you don't understand. We're not asking them to give what they haven't got. We're asking them to learn to let God give through them by trusting Him to provide what He's got. And what's more, as they see God grow their giving, their faith in God will grow stronger that He can provide for their living. This is a revival. This isn't about fundraising, even money for missions raising. This is about faith raising. Some of our people will see God show up on the scene of their lives in marvelous ways that will enable them to find their way through this crisis with Him. And the finance committee consented. It was Friday before Faith Promise Sunday. I went to my mailbox at the church and there was an envelope. I opened it, and inside there was a letter, typewritten. It read, Doug, our family senses God is leading us to support Faith Promise. We believe in these difficult times that as our people find God able to provide what they need to give, their faith will be strengthened in the Lord's ability to provide what they need to live. So God is leading us to trust Him to provide what we will need to give to match whatever the total faith promises and total faith promise receipts of our church are over the next year. Holy mackerel. Wow. Is God in this? Well, the bad news is the letter was unsigned. The good news is there was another letter with it. I opened it and it read, to show the earnestness of our intentions, we have enclosed a cashier's check for $5,000. Cashier's check? Yes. They didn't want their identity known. That next year, in the midst of all that financial distress, our church saw God provide through Faith Promise Giving a total of $320,722, of which $139,817 came as a matching amount. Every month, we published the Faith Promise receipts in the finance report, and shortly thereafter, there would come in a mail a matching amount. Always a cashier's check, typically from different banks, to preserve and protect the anonymity of the family, trusting God to provide through them. When the next year came and we were to have our second missions conference in Faith Promise, on that Friday before, I went to my box and there it was, another letter. carbon copy or duplicate of the last year's with a handwritten statement that said, God has been faithful to provide. We will be faithful to give. Count us in for another year. That second year. That second year in the throes of that economy, the faith promise total of the church community amounted to $542,756, of which the matching contribution included in it was $276,265. You will be enriched in every way, writes Paul, for great generosity. Greater than your 5-inch frying pan can begin to comprehend. When you look not simply to what you've got for what you can give, but when you dare to take a step of faith that God can give what He's got through you. That matching faith promise continued for a third year, and then it was gone. At the end of 6 years at First Methodist through faith promise, the total amount received was $1,503,248, of which the matching faith promise accounted for $542,746. You will be enriched for great generosity. Oh, it doesn't have to be great in terms of comparable to that. This isn't shared with you to impress you. It's shared to make an impression on you that whatever great means, it's bigger than we've got that we can give, but not too big. For Mother Teresa to find in her purse. For Kathy to discover coming through the earnings of babysitting. For a funeral honorarium or a church story like you've heard. So we're closing, and here's the invitation. It's an invitation from Jesus to dare to believe that you can be enriched for great generosity because God is able to give greatly through you. Will you trust God and step out? And write on that faith promise card. It's between you and Him. That's why you don't sign it. But you just put the amount on it. Why put an amount on it? Because that's what faith always does. Gets awfully specific. And that's your way of saying, God, let's see where we go this year. And discover what God can give you. It's the only way you'll ever get to give beyond your 6-inch frying pan, however big that may be in terms of what you've got to give. And what's better? It's a marvelous way to put faith to work. Will you join me as we pray? You're big enough for all of us. You're good enough to show up on the scene of any life that dares to engage you and in faith follow after you. Indeed, it's not just missions that calls us. As wonderful as and as in need as that is, it's you calling us to discover that we can give not only according to our means, but beyond our means.